And welcome back. So, Lamar, you were saying.
Well, and so on the mainstream media, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, Trump was basically given a free ride for almost a year. And
Yeah, somewhere between $2 and $4 billion worth of free publicity in the corporate media.
Well, and I believe the chairman of the company that owns CNN basically said he's great for ratings.
Oh, that was CBS. Well, maybe the chairman of CNN said that, but the famous quote. In fact, we've got. Oh, you've got the audio. You want to play it, Troy? Here it is.
It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. That's all I got to say.
That's Les Moonves, the chairman of CBS, or the CEO.
And of course, even now, CNN gives Donald Trump spokespeople equal time, as if saying lies and distortions somehow is needed to balance out actual facts. I mean, most news people have just abdicated, reporting objective facts, as Walter Cronkite eventually tried to do after he had been basically deceived on Vietnam, like a lot of people. So, and the parallels, I mean, they get really deep too. I mean, it's like, Trump hates to pay income taxes like regular working people do, like you and I do. Richard Nixon hated to pay income taxes. And in fact, the "I am not a crook" line that you will hear 100 times in the mainstream media over the next month was not about Watergate. It was about allegations that Nixon hadn't paid his taxes. In fact, before Nixon ran for the presidency and finally won it, his job was working for a large New York law firm whose job was to keep America's wealthiest people from having to pay taxes.
Right, and beyond that, if you listen to the entire clip, we played it last week of Nixon, his "I am not a crook" speech. Chris, can you quickly grab that? You've got it? You can play it right now? Listen to this. This is, just putting this in context. Nixon is saying, I did not profit off the presidency. And put that in the context of Donald Trump with his hotel right down the street from us here in Washington, D.C. Here's Richard Nixon.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
So he wasn't even talking about Watergate. He was talking about, I'm not, profiting off being president of the United States. And here's Donald Trump, pretty conspicuously profiting off being president of the United States.
Well, except again, though, everything Nixon just said is a lie. He was totally obstructing justice. He hated the investigation so much. Of course, he fired the special prosecutor in the Saturday Night Massacre. And Nixon had been personally profiting from politics, going all the way to his Checkers speech, which was about one slush fund when he had more, in '68 alone. It wasn't just the dictator of South Vietnam that was giving Nixon big personal bribes. It was the dictator of Iran, the Shah, the dictators who were ruling Greece at the time. Again, a lot of America's biggest businessmen, like Howard Hughes, the famous billionaire. And so Nixon was profiting all the time. He was laundering the money through his mob associate, Bebe Rebozo, who actually had a house in his Key Biscayne compound in Florida, and also lived part of the time out in San Clemente, which if people will actually go and look at photos of San Clemente, I mean, it's one of those beautiful pieces of property in the whole state of California. Another thing I was going to point out that shocked me when I thought about it, so in 1972, when the Watergate break-ins happened, they were just a small part of a massive criminal enterprise designed to reelect Richard Nixon. One way Nixon appeared presidential while his dirty tricks in political crimes teams were doing all these crimes was he made the famous outreach to China and the famous outreach to Russia. So he was using foreign policy in these interactions with China and Russia to distract the news media while his henchmen were doing all these crimes. And if you think about it, Trump is doing some very similar things. I mean, Trump and his interactions with China, where they go from villain to hero, Trump and his interactions in terms of Russia, all while Trump, and of course the other thing that Nixon was doing was doing a lot of shady stuff in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And now we have Trump I think they're talking about sending 4,000 or 5,000 more troops to Afghanistan. They're ramping up things with the shoot down in Syria today.
Yeah.
So again, it's just, China and Russia, they were good for Richard Nixon. Right now, at least, they're good for Donald Trump as well.
Yeah. How did the backgrounds of Richard Nixon and Donald Trump make them the men they became?
Both actually, and it's hard for people to imagine this because a lot of people who voted for him think of Trump as a billionaire, when of course he may not even be one. But they both saw themselves as outsiders, not just to the political establishments, but to the old Eastern money establishments. In Nixon's case, he did well enough in high school to earn a scholarship to Harvard. He should have been part of the Eastern establishment. His Republican father didn't have enough money. It wouldn't borrow the money to pay Nixon's living expenses. He only got a tuition scholarship. So instead, Richard Nixon got to spend summers cleaning toilets at a country club and running a sleazy booth at a sideshow carnival. And so Nixon couldn't be part of the Eastern establishment. Therefore, they became the villains. And Trump is the same way. I mean, there is old money, high society New York, blue bloods. I mean, Donald Trump to them is like a sleazy used car salesman.
Right.
So, Trump's grandfather started out with brothels, which puts an interesting spin on Trump's use of his modeling agency and his beauty pageants. Trump's father was apparently a Klan member and then was caught discriminating against minorities for housing in the 70s. So, so Trump came from a pretty sleazy, background, and yet they always had this striving to be better, to somehow get in the club, these clubs that were never going to let them in. Once Nixon was president, he barely lifted a finger to try to elect Republican senators and congressmen. I mean, it was about him and how much money he could make and how much power he could get. And look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump isn't appointing people to help serve the American people at the EPA and all these other agencies. He's appointing the people who are determined to tear down the Department of Education, the Environmental Protection Agency. So, and he's just concerned about lining his own pockets. And America be damned. Apparently, that was the philosophy of both Nixon and apparently is still the philosophy for Trump.
Yeah. So that takes us to Roy Cohn. And then Roy Cohn, wasn't he the guy who brought Nixon and Trump together?
Yeah, I mean, they actually came together. And we do have to give some credit to political, I think he likes to call himself a trickster, Roger Stone, who was a very low-level operative during Watergate. Stone was not a major player during Watergate at all, but he did love Richard Nixon. He has Nixon's face tattooed on his back, apparently. And so when Stone was working in politics in the early 80s, he went to see Roy Cohn. Cohn said, yeah, if you want to try to get this Reagan guy elected, you need to get some money. You should talk to this Donald Trump. Stone did, and then it was Stone that brought Trump and Nixon together at the owner's box at Yankee Stadium, but they later on got to spend, days together. So it is no coincidence, and it's not just due to Roger Stone's advising of Trump or Roger Ailes advising of Trump, because Ailes was Nixon's political spin master and media master going back to 1968. But I mean, Trump literally heard how to win and how to line your pockets directly from the horse's mouth, directly from Richard Nixon. And it was Nixon who apparently, according to Roger Stone, and there's some written backup for this, was the first person to say that Donald Trump should be president. So, I mean, it takes one to know one.
Yeah, I guess so. Lamar Waldron is with us for the hour. His books, The Hidden History, the JFK Assassination, more recently, The Hidden Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. We'll be back with Lamar right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talking about Richard Nixon and Donald Trump, Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA is Lamar's most recent book. We'll be right back.